Welcome back to the Archive Network. Aurelius here, with Malik, curators of the Conflict Archive. We left War of Spanish Succession last time by the close of 1710, the war's direction had shifted. Today we pick up where we left off. The year 1709 dawned over a continent in agony. Europe was battered by years of war, and now faced famine. Fields that once promised abundance lay barren, victims of failed harvests and relentless campaigning. Every class in France felt the gnawing hunger. Bread riots erupted in cities, as desperation drove men and women to storm bakeries.
Aurelius, it's crucial to remember that hunger doesn't discriminate. The wealthy hoarded what little bread remained, while the poor were left to fight over crumbs on the streets. Louis XIV's treasury was threadbare, but it wasn't just coins that were lacking. Morale had eroded completely. Soldiers deserted in droves as despair took hold, and their loyalty vanished, leaving behind families who had once depended on them. It was a heartbreaking scene, one that showed how deeply the crisis cut through the fabric of society.
The situation was truly dire, particularly for the French High Command. Their armies were facing not just defeat but also the grim specter of starvation. The Battle of Malplaquet on September 11, 1709, loomed over them as a defining moment. It would become the largest and bloodiest clash of the war, where Allied forces clashed fiercely with French defenders. With each passing day, the stakes grew higher, and we could see how quickly fortunes could shift in this ruthless theater of war.
But was it really a defining moment for the French? Villa's men were outnumbered, yet they dug in and fortified their positions with remarkable determination. The Allies had the upper hand, but at a staggering cost. The outcome of Malplaquet turned out to be a Pyrrhic victory. Heavy losses left the Allied forces too exhausted to push forward, and many soldiers paid the ultimate price. Families were torn apart, and the toll of war weighed heavily on everyone involved.
The Allies suffered tremendously, as we can see. By day's end, over 30,000 men lay dead or wounded, a staggering loss that echoes through history. The battlefield was a grim tableau of carnage, with survivors left to stagger among the fallen, haunted by the sights and sounds of war. Marshal Villars, wounded yet resolute, penned a letter to Louis XIV, and it dripped with irony, reflecting the bitter truth of their struggle. Such is the cost of ambition on this grand stage.
His words were a bitter reminder of the cost of war. For the Allies, any claim to victory was overshadowed by the loss. Survivors searched for comrades among the dead, while local villagers scavenged for scraps. This was not the glory of battle. It was a haunting memory that would linger long after the guns fell silent.
As northern France bled, the struggle in Spain intensified. The Allies had seized Madrid, but their victory felt hollow. Spanish peasants eyed them with hostility, their loyalty firmly resting with Philip V. Now, the Allied forces found themselves stranded in a land that was anything but friendly. Ambushes became a daily threat, and dwindling supplies only added to their woes. This is the harsh reality of warfare. The local populace often sees invaders as oppressors, not liberators.
And the Spanish people's cold eyes spoke volumes. They weren't just sitting back, watching history unfold. No, they were actively shaping their own fate, caught in a struggle that affected them deeply. The Habsburg claimant, Archduke Charles, just couldn't spark any real loyalty among them. They were yearning for more than military strategy. They craved a connection, something that spoke to their very hearts and minds. It was about their lives, their families, and their hopes for the future.
As the Allies struggled, the true cost of war became all too apparent in both London and Vienna. The news of Malplaquet's staggering losses sparked outrage across the public. Sentiment quickly shifted against the war, with pamphlets circulating that detailed the casualties and the grieving families left behind. Queen Anne's government found itself hesitating, caught between a divided political landscape and an increasingly angry populace. We see how quickly support can erode when the toll of conflict hits home.
The public's outrage wasn't just noise. It was a deep reflection of desperation. The Dutch economy, once a pillar of the Grand Alliance, began to buckle under the strain. You could feel the exhaustion seeping into every negotiation. People were tired, worn down by the constant losses. This wasn't just about military failures. It was about families torn apart, lives shattered, and a community struggling to cope with a human cost that had become unbearable.
The French, sensing the tide had turned, "Oh, and so did he." Louis XIV, once the architect of his dynasty's fate, now pleaded for his grandson's right to the Spanish throne. His desperation was palpable as famine and plague swept through his kingdom. However, the alliance that had brought France to the edge of defeat began to fracture.
Each member of that alliance had their own interests to consider. Survival took precedence over victory, and that meant tough choices. In Spain, the civilian costs soared as the Bourbon armies unleashed devastation. Entire communities were erased overnight. Towns like Sativa became haunting symbols of this relentless destruction, where families lost everything. The impact was felt far beyond the battlefield, as countless lives were shattered, leaving scars that would last for generations. We can't forget the human toll in these conflicts.
By the close of 1710, the war's direction had shifted dramatically. The Allies, fractured and weary, found themselves unable to sustain their advance any longer. Meanwhile, the French had weathered the storm, though the cost was staggering, both in lives and resources. As we sift through the ashes of this conflict, we must ask ourselves, how can peace emerge from such profound devastation? History teaches us that rebuilding is never simple, but it's essential if we're to avoid repeating these mistakes.
That's where we leave it this time. War of Spanish Succession continues. The story isn't finished yet. Find the full series on the Conflict Archive, part of the Archive Network. We'll be back with the next chapter.